The morning of the biggest interview of my life, I walked into my home studio to find 3 years of work scattered across the floor like confetti. Paint smeared across canvases, torn sketches floating in coffee puddles, and my leather portfolio, the one I'd saved for months to buy, slashed open with what looked like kitchen scissors. Standing in the doorway behind me, Rachel didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. "Oops," she said, examining her nails. "Guess you'll have to reschedule that fancy gallery interview." But Rachel had made one crucial mistake. She thought destroying my art would destroy my spirit. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed me the perfect subject for my next masterpiece, and this time, the canvas would be her entire world. By the time I was done, everyone at Henderson & Associates Marketing would know exactly who my sister really was. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. This wasn't the first time Rachel had tried to sabotage me, but it was definitely going to be the last. Growing up as twins in Portland, Oregon, people always expected us to be close. They'd coo over how we looked so similar. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same freckles dusting our cheeks. But that's where the similarities ended. While I spent afternoons sketching in coffee shops and saving every dollar for art supplies, Rachel was perfecting the art of taking credit for other people's work. It started small in high school. My watercolor of the old Burnside Bridge won the district art competition, but somehow Rachel ended up in the newspaper photo holding my award because she looked better in pictures. When I got accepted to the Portland Institute of Art with a partial scholarship, Rachel told our parents I'd probably waste the opportunity anyway, and convince them to spend my college fund on renovating their kitchen instead. After graduation, while I worked 3 jobs to pay off student loans and build my portfolio, Rachel landed a cushy marketing position at Henderson & Associates through a family connection. She made more in her first year than I'd made in 3, but that wasn't enough for her. She needed to make sure I stayed small, stayed struggling, stayed in her shadow. Every family dinner became a performance. "Oh, Sophia's still playing with her little paintings," she'd say with a laugh that sounded like broken glass. "I keep telling her she should get a real job like mine. Marketing is where the money is." Mom would nod sympathetically while Dad suggested I consider something more practical. And I'd sit there, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering why my own family felt like a room with no oxygen. But last month, everything changed. Marcus Chen, the curator at Westfield Contemporary Gallery, saw my work at a local coffee shop exhibition. He handed me his card and said words I'd dreamed of hearing my entire life. "We'd like to discuss representation." The interview was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been preparing for 3 weeks, organizing my best pieces, practicing my artist statement, researching every artist they'd ever shown. Rachel found out because she was staying at my apartment after her lease ended. She was supposed to move out the week before my interview, but kept finding excuses to extend her stay. "Just a few more days, Soph. You know how stressful moving is." I should have said no. I should have changed the locks. But despite everything, she was still my sister, and some part of me kept hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally be happy for my success. Instead, she gave me the most expensive lesson of my life about trust. The night before my interview, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking into my studio, adjusting pieces in my portfolio, rehearsing my presentation. My hands shook every time I touched the portfolio, not from nerves but from excitement. This was my shot. After 5 years of rejection letters, closed doors, and "we'll keep your information on file" responses, someone actually wanted to see my work. I'd arranged everything perfectly, my 3 best oil paintings, each representing a different phase of my artistic evolution. The abstract series I'd worked on for 8 months, inspired by the changing seasons in Powell Butte. The portrait collection that captured the raw emotions of people experiencing homelessness in downtown Portland. And my newest work, a mixed media piece that incorporated recycled materials, showing how beauty could emerge from things others had thrown away. At midnight, I finally forced myself to go to bed. The interview was at 9 a.m. I needed to be sharp, articulate, confident. I set 3 alarms and laid out my interview clothes. A charcoal blazer I'd thrifted and tailored myself, paired with my only good pair of pants. I even ironed everything twice. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of crashing from my studio. My first thought was the earthquake. Portland sits on several fault lines, and growing up here makes you alert to that particular kind of chaos. But earthquakes don't usually come with the sound of deliberate, methodical destruction. I ran down the hallway in my pajamas and stopped dead in the doorway. Rachel stood in the center of my studio like a tornado in human form, my portfolio open at her feet, its contents scattered and destroyed. She'd poured coffee over my abstract series, 3 months of work dissolving into brown stains. My portrait collection was torn down the middle, each face split in half like a broken mirror. The mixed media piece lay in fragments, the carefully balanced elements now just trash again. But it was the way she looked at me that broke something fundamental inside my chest. No surprise, no fake apology, no pretense of an accident. Just cold, calculated satisfaction. She'd planned this. While I was lying awake with excitement, she was lying awake with rage, plotting the exact way to destroy not just my art, but my future. Why? I whispered, the word barely making it past my throat. She tilted her head like I'd asked something genuinely puzzling. Because, Sophia, some people work for success, and others just get lucky. I couldn't let you embarrass our family by pretending you deserve something you don't. She stepped carefully around the destruction, making sure not to get paint on her designer shoes. Besides, Marcus Chen is friends with my boss. When he hears about this, he'll understand that you're just not reliable. That's when I realized Rachel's plan wasn't just about destroying my portfolio. She'd calculated this perfectly. The timing, the gallery connection, even the way she'd make it look like I was unstable, unprofessional, not worth the risk. She wasn't just stealing my opportunity. She was poisoning my reputation before I'd even had the chance to build one. I looked around at 3 years of work, reduced to garbage, at dreams literally torn to pieces, and something shifted inside me. The part of me that had spent decades making excuses for her cruelty, that had believed maybe she'd change, that had convinced myself family meant tolerance of abuse, that part finally died. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Some people work for success. And you're about to find out exactly how hard I'm willing to work. After Rachel left for work that morning, she actually had the audacity to grab coffee and a muffin on her way out, stepping over my destroyed paintings like they were sidewalk cracks. I sat in the wreckage of my studio and did something I'd never done before. I didn't cry. I didn't call my parents for comfort. I didn't even clean up the mess. Instead, I made a list. First, I called Marcus Chen's office and rescheduled the interview. His assistant, thankfully, was understanding. Family emergency, I explained, which wasn't technically a lie. Could we possibly meet next week instead? Marcus himself got on the phone and said, take all the time you need. Good art can't be rushed. If only he knew how right he was about to be. While I waited for my laptop to boot up, Rachel had somehow missed it in her rampage, probably because it was charging in my bedroom. I started documenting everything. Photos of the destroyed paintings from every angle. Screenshots of the dates I'd posted work-in-progress shots on Instagram, proving how long I'd been working on each piece. I even found the receipt for the portfolio, purchased 8 months ago with money I'd saved from my weekend farmer's market booth. But documentation was just the beginning. If Rachel thought she could destroy my present to steal my future, she'd underestimated what I was capable of creating from absolutely nothing. I spent the next 6 hours researching everything I could about Henderson and Associates marketing, their client list, their company values, their recent campaigns, and most importantly, their social media presence. They prided themselves on authentic storytelling and supporting local artists in our community initiatives. Their website featured a whole section about their commitment to, quote, fostering creativity and innovation in Portland's cultural landscape. Rachel worked as a senior account coordinator, which meant she managed social media campaigns for their smaller clients. But here's what she probably didn't put on her LinkedIn profile. She'd been taking credit for freelance graphic design work I'd been doing under a pseudonym. Remember those trendy logos for 3 different coffee shops that Henderson and Associates had showcased in their portfolio last year? The ones that won them the Portland Small Business Marketing Award? Every single design concept had come from me. I'd been desperate for money, and Rachel had offered to help me network by connecting me with her company's clients. She'd take my concepts, clean them up slightly, and present them as her own work. I was paid as a freelance consultant through a shell company, which meant Henderson and Associates never knew the real creative force behind their award-winning designs. Rachel had built her reputation on my talent while making sure I remained invisible. But now I had receipts, digital files with timestamps, email conversations where she'd asked for inspiration and I'd sent completed concepts, bank records showing payments from her personal account to mine, payments that lined up perfectly with Henderson and Associates' major client wins. The plan crystallized like ice forming on a window. I wouldn't just expose what she'd done to my portfolio. I'd expose the 3 years of theft that had built her entire career. And I'd do it in the most public, professional way possible, right in front of the colleagues who'd been praising her for work she'd stolen from me. I opened a new canvas in Photoshop and started designing. Not a painting this time, but something Rachel would understand perfectly. A presentation. Slide by slide, I built the story of how Henderson and Associates' rising star had actually been plagiarizing her own sister's work for years. Clean graphics, clear timelines, undeniable evidence. But the masterpiece wasn't the presentation itself. The masterpiece was how I was going to deliver it. Henderson and Associates held mandatory all-staff meetings every Tuesday at 2 p.m. They called them inspiration sessions, a chance for different team members to share successful campaigns and creative strategies with the whole company. According to their public LinkedIn posts, these meetings often featured 40 to 50 employees, including senior partners and department heads. Rachel had mentioned these meetings dozens of times, usually to brag about presentations she'd given, or to complain about boring sessions led by other departments. She'd even shown me photos from some of them. Professional conference room, huge projection screen, everyone gathered around with notebooks and laptops. Perfect. I had exactly 6 days to rebuild my portfolio, prepare my presentation, and figure out how to get myself into that conference room. 6 days to turn the worst thing that had ever happened to me into the best thing that had ever happened to my career. Rachel thought she'd destroyed my future. Instead, she'd just given me the raw materials to build something incredible. The next 6 days passed like a montage in a movie about transformation. I barely slept, barely ate, but I'd never felt more focused in my life. While Rachel went to work each morning, probably congratulating herself on her successful sabotage, I was rebuilding my entire artistic identity from the ground up. First, the portfolio. I couldn't recreate the destroyed paintings. 3 years of work doesn't materialize overnight, but I could do something better. I created a multimedia presentation that told the story of artistic resilience. Each section showed the evolution of my work, but instead of hiding the struggle, I highlighted it. Photos of my tiny studio apartment, time-lapse videos of paintings in progress, screenshots of rejection emails followed by breakthrough moments. The centerpiece was a digital art piece I called Phoenix Rising, a layered composition that incorporated photos of my destroyed paintings, transformed them into something haunting and beautiful, and juxtaposed them with images of renewal and growth. It was the most honest work I'd ever created, and looking at it gave me chills. But the real work was preparing for Tuesday's presentation at Henderson and Associates. I researched everything about their company culture. They prided themselves on transparency, innovation, and supporting local artists. Their mission statement talked about authentic partnerships and ethical business practices. Perfect. They were about to find out how well they lived up to those values. Monday night, I put on my best professional outfit, the same charcoal blazer I'd planned to wear to my gallery interview, paired with confident red lipstick that made me feel like I could conquer anything. I printed out business cards with my real name and contact information. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Tuesday morning at 1:45 p.m., I walked into the sleek downtown offices of Henderson and Associates like I belonged there. The receptionist, a friendly woman named Jennifer, looked up with a welcoming smile. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Hi there, are you here for the inspiration session? I took a deep breath. Yes, I'm Sophie Martinez. I'm presenting today about creative collaboration and artistic integrity. She checked her tablet, frowned slightly, then shrugged. I don't see you on the list, but Marcus from accounting added a guest last minute and forgot to update me. Conference room B, just down the hall. Can I get you some coffee? Sometimes the universe aligns perfectly with your plans. I walked into conference room B and felt my heart skip. 43 people filled the space. Designers, account managers, department heads, and sitting in the third row with her laptop open and her smuggest expression in place, Rachel. She was mid-conversation with the woman next to her, probably sharing some fabricated story about her latest creative breakthrough. She saw me and her face went through 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, panic, anger, and finally a forced smile that looked like it was being held up by fishing wire. The presentation screen was already set up, and a man I recognized as David Henderson, the company's founding partner, was making introductory remarks about the value of cross-departmental inspiration. He gestured toward the empty presenter's spot and said, "Today we have a special guest who's going to share some insights about creative collaboration." I walked to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projection system, and looked out at 43 faces staring back at me with polite, expectant attention. Rachel's face had drained of all color. She looked like she was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice clear and confident. "My name is Sophie Martinez, and I'm here to talk about artistic integrity, creative theft, and what happens when someone builds their entire career on stolen work." The first slide appeared on the screen, the hidden artist behind Henderson & Associates award-winning designs. The room went dead silent except for the sound of Rachel's chair squeaking as she shifted uncomfortably. David Henderson leaned forward, suddenly very interested. The woman next to Rachel turned to stare at her with raised eyebrows. 3 years ago, I continued, someone in this room started taking credit for designs that weren't hers. Today I'm here to tell you the real story behind some of your most celebrated campaigns. Rachel stood up abruptly. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice shaky. "She's my sister, and she's having some kind of breakdown." I smiled and clicked to the next slide. A side-by-side comparison of my original design files and Henderson & Associates' final presentations, complete with timestamps and metadata. "The only breakdown here," I said calmly, "is the breakdown of trust that happens when someone discovers they've been systematically robbed of credit for their own work." That's when David Henderson started taking notes, and I knew I had them. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out 3 years of theft, with the precision of a prosecutor and the passion of an artist who'd finally found her voice. Every slide built on the last, creating an undeniable narrative of systematic plagiarism that had won Henderson & Associates awards, clients, and recognition, all built on work they'd never known was stolen. The room was dead silent except for the soft clicking of my presentation remote and the increasingly frantic sound of Rachel's breathing. I showed email chains where she'd asked me for inspiration, followed by exact replicas of my concepts in Henderson & Associates client presentations. Bank records proving she'd paid me from her personal account for freelance work that she then claimed as her own. Before and after comparisons that made it impossible to deny the timeline of theft. The Portland Small Business Marketing Award they'd won last year? Based entirely on my coffee shop logo designs. The creative campaign that had earned Rachel her last promotion? Built on a series of social media graphics I'd created during a particularly desperate month when I needed grocery money. Even her most recent client presentation, the one she'd been bragging about at dinner last week, featured design elements lifted directly from my Instagram portfolio. "The most devastating part," I said, advancing to a slide showing my destroyed portfolio, "is that when I finally had the chance to present my work under my own name, to build my own career, to step out from behind the shadow of stolen credit," I paused, letting the image of paint-soaked canvases and shredded sketches fill the screen. "This is what I found in my studio yesterday morning." The woman sitting next to Rachel, I'd learned from company LinkedIn profiles that she was Janet Morrison, head of creative services, turned to stare at Rachel with an expression of pure disgust. David Henderson was no longer just taking notes. He was typing rapidly on his laptop, probably already drafting legal documents. Rachel finally found her voice. "This is insane," she said, standing up so fast her chair rolled backward. She's lying. She's jealous because I have a real career and she's still playing with finger paints in her apartment. I clicked to the next slide, a screen recording of me creating one of her award-winning logos from start to finish, complete with my digital signature embedded in the file metadata. The beautiful thing about digital art, I said, is that every brushstroke, every layer, every decision is recorded with timestamps and unique identifiers. Rachel may have stolen my credit, but she could never steal my process. David Henderson stood up. Rachel, I think you should step outside for a moment. But Rachel wasn't done. 3 years of successfully stealing my work had made her arrogant, convinced of her own invincibility. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice rising. Fine. Yes, I used some of her ideas. But ideas are worthless without execution, without professional presentation, without the ability to actually sell them to clients. She would have wasted all of this talent sitting in coffee shops forever. The room collectively inhaled. Even I hadn't expected her to confess so completely. I gave her work a real platform, Rachel continued, apparently unaware that she was career-sabotaging herself in front of 43 witnesses. I made it matter. I made it successful. She should be thanking me. Janet Morrison stood up next. Rachel, you're fired. Security will escort you out. You'll be hearing from our legal department about restitution and damages. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more slide. The final slide was simple. My contact information, my website, and the words, available for consultation, collaboration, and authentic creative partnerships. David Henderson approached me as the room slowly emptied, employees filing out with wide eyes and hushed conversations about what they'd just witnessed. Ms. Martinez, he said, I owe you an enormous apology on behalf of Henderson and Associates. We had no idea Rachel was misrepresenting the source of her work. We pride ourselves on ethical business practices, and what happened here is completely contrary to our values. He paused, looking at my presentation materials. I'd like to discuss making this right. We'll be crediting you retroactively for all the work Rachel claimed, and frankly, after seeing your talent and your professionalism today, I'd like to talk about bringing you on as a creative consultant. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new studio, a converted warehouse space in the Pearl District that I can actually afford, thanks to my consulting contract with Henderson and Associates and 3 other firms who reached out after word spread about my presentation. The walls are covered with new work, pieces that tell stories of resilience, authenticity, and the power of finally claiming your own voice. Marcus Chen rescheduled our gallery interview, and after seeing my Phoenix Rising series, the collection inspired by rebuilding after destruction, Westfield Contemporary offered me not just representation, but my first solo exhibition. Rachel tried to contact me twice, once through our parents, asking for, quote, forgiveness and a fresh start. Once directly claiming she was, quote, getting help and wanted to make amends. I didn't respond to either message. Some bridges burn for good reason, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let them turn to ash. My parents still don't fully understand what happened. They keep suggesting family therapy, asking when Rachel and I will work things out. But I've learned that not every relationship deserves to be salvaged, and not every family member deserves access to your life just because you share DNA. Last week, Laia, my 7-year-old neighbor whose single mom works 2 jobs, came by the studio after school. She sat cross-legged on the floor, watching me paint, and asked, why do you make so many pictures of things breaking and then getting put back together? I set down my brush and looked at her serious little face. Because sometimes, I said, the most beautiful art comes from the pieces people thought were too broken to save. She nodded like this made perfect sense, then picked up a pencil and started drawing her own picture of something broken becoming beautiful. The exhibition opens next month. The title is Reclaimed, an artist's journey from theft to truth. Rachel won't be invited to the opening, but that's okay. This was never about her anyway. It was about learning that your worth doesn't depend on other people's approval, that your talent can't be stolen by someone who lacks the soul to create, and that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the raw material for the best thing you've ever built. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. This one ends with boundaries, self-respect, and a red-hot art career built on authenticity instead of theft. And that's exactly how I wanted it to end. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.